Hey everybody, so I was browsing around Dribble the other day, which is a cool website for kind of designers to post various designs and interfaces they've made. It's a cool way to see some interesting mobile app designs as well, and some interesting kind of interface concepts. It's not specifically for mobile apps, but there is a lot of sort of mobile app things on there. And I've been wanting to focus a lot on some UI stuff for Ionic recently. I think that we can take Ionic a lot further than what we can get with just the default controls. If we put a bit of kind of extra effort into the interface, into designing some custom components, or just adding a bit of styling, we can create some pretty cool interfaces. So what I thought would be fun to do is just taking some designs that we find on Dribble, or anywhere really, and just seeing if we can implement a similar interface in Ionic. And so I found this design here, which is really cool. We're not going to take the whole design or anything like that. I just want to see if I can implement the basic idea of the interface here. So obviously big props to Vadim, I think it's how you pronounce it, sorry if that's wrong, for creating this. This is a really cool design, and obviously we don't want to take anything away from them. We don't want to steal anything here. I just purely want to just see if we can make this work in Ionic. And so what I want to try to do is focus on this third sort of screen here, and this whole concept of basically having this kind of background header at the top, and having this content area be pushed down to the bottom a bit in this sort of card looking container. So what we're going to try to do first is create something that looks like this. Again, we're not going to be using the design elements here, just the layout itself. We want to see if we can achieve that in Ionic. So ours isn't going to look as nice as this is, but we could certainly get it to that level if we wanted to. And then depending on how that goes, I thought it would also be interesting to add a bit of an animation to this as well. I can't really tell, if this is a static image, obviously, what the intent is with the interface here. But I would think it would be cool if you could kind of have this as a sort of scrollable area when you scroll, that the main content area here would then push up to then occupy the whole screen. So this header area would only be displayed with that background image there when you're at the top, basically. And there's some different things we could try to mess around with that. But yeah, we'll see how we go. We'll just have a bit of a play around and see if we can do something interesting. So I've already got an Ionic app generated, and I have it served in the browser here. This is an Ionic Angular application, if I haven't mentioned that already. So we're just going to jump right into the code and start playing around with some things. So I think what we'll need to do is, I think the general layout for this should be pretty simple. I think we've still sort of got the header there, so we want to keep the ability to add some icons, buttons, or whatever in that top header area. This could just be our main content area. So we'll have the Ion header, the Ion content, and what I'm thinking is that we'll probably just offset the content area more than it usually is to make that background visible. So I haven't planned any of this out in advance, so I don't know how difficult or easy this is going to be, or whether it's going to work at all, but let's give it a shot. So as I just mentioned, we kind of have most of the layout we want set up already, just a header area, content area, and we got the toolbar at the top there. I'll probably get rid of the title here, and we'll set up just one button. I'm not too worried about making it look exactly like that design, so I'm just gonna have one button on, I'll put it on the right hand side, I guess. And which icon we're gonna use? Let's go just with heart. Will do for now, I think. Okay, so we have a heart there. And what we want to do now is push this content area down. So I'll just bring up the element debugger here. So the basic idea is we want to push this down. And there is actually some CSS variables already set up for this, so maybe it would make more sense if we hook into those. So if we set that offset top to 100 pixels, what is that going to do? I'm not actually sure what these offset variables do. It doesn't seem to push that down. I'm not sure what's using that. Is it the inner scroll? Okay, so yeah, it is the inner scroll here that's using that. I don't think this is using it for the just general position of the ion content, so we won't use that, I don't think, because we want to push that whole block down. So let me just undo everything. So since we want to push this down with animation in mind, we just want to pop that down just a little bit. But if we do want to animate it, it's important to keep in mind properties that are going to animate well. And so we can animate a lot of CSS properties, but there are a few that perform a lot better just because of the way they work. They're not causing the browser to need to do as much work in re-rendering the page. And so generally we want to use the properties that aren't going to trigger layouts, which is where the browser needs to recalculate where everything is on the page. So if you're changing margins and padding and positions of things, it could affect other elements on the page, and now they're in a new position. So the browser needs to work out where they are now based on the new values and render everything and calculate where it all is, which can be an expensive operation. But if we use things like transforms and opacity, they don't cause those layouts. So what we will probably do here is we'll use a transform, use translate 3D, which is just going to allow us to move an element in the X, Y, and Z axis. We don't actually need a Z axis here, but translate 3D performs better. I will put an asterisk on that because it's been a while since I've looked at the specifics of this, but the general idea is the translate 3D methods would use the sort of hardware acceleration, or use the GPU of the computer to help with that, with displaying that. But yeah, it's been a little bit since I've looked into the specifics of that, so maybe things aren't exactly like that anymore. But anyway, we don't want to translate in the X direction, so we'll say 0, and let's just say 50 pixels and 0. So now you can see we've sort of just bumped that ion content down 50 pixels. Maybe we want to be a bit more dramatic than that. We'll say 200 pixels. We can always mess with these values later. And then we'll just need to put some kind of background in. So I think if we target app home perhaps might be the best idea here. So I'll just set a background color of black for now, and that sort of achieves the effect we want. So since that general idea seems to be working, let's just add those into our actual code. I'm just going to go back and copy my transform. So let's get into our SCSS file, and on ion content, we are going to add that transform. Oops. And to app home, we'll add that color as well. I might actually change the color to something a bit easier to look at, but let's just get this working. Okay, so the position worked, but the background color didn't work there. Let's take a look at that. I don't usually set a background on the actual component itself, so it's actually because, oops, don't do that. This needs to sit a bit higher. This actually needs to go into the global CSS. Actually, I think I can use host on this. Let me try that. Yes, I can. Yeah, so the CSS we have here is associated with this home component, so that app home tag is kind of the host component, so we can't really target it. But if we use this host pseudo selector, that's going to allow us to actually target the actual tag for the app home component here, which we have the selector set as app home. So that is what is happening there. So we don't need to put this in global. All right, so we're kind of getting somewhere now. I did say I wanted to change this to a nicer color. So let's just do that. Go for a kind of blue. Something warmer maybe. Orange. Let's go with that. Why not? Doesn't really matter for now. Alright, so we have that being orange now. Now let's just see if we can work on this ion content. So we want to basically just give it a border radius. So these top corners here are rounded. And so let's see how we go with that. What I should do first actually is I'm going to look in the Ionic framework documentation to check what kind of CSS variables we have to work with. So I'm going to bring up ion content. Oh, I should click on the components first. Ion content. Okay, custom properties. So background color, keyboard offset bottom, top, padding. So nothing there for setting the border radius, which is fine. So what I want to do is give a border radius to this ion content, which I don't think is actually working. Let me just do a little sanity check here and see if I can actually put a, can I put a border radius on the header or the toolbar? Yeah, so I can do it on the toolbar there, which looks kind of funky, but I don't think we're gonna do that. On the header itself, it doesn't work. So yeah, it has to be on that toolbar. So let me just get rid of that. Might be a case of dealing with the shadow DOM here. Is it this inner scroll that would have to have the border radius? Yeah, so that works. So now we just need to see if we can actually get that inside the shadow DOM. So we'll see what it's using to set the border radius. Yeah, so there's no CSS variables there that we can make use of to set that border radius inside the shadow DOM. I'll link to a video about shadow DOM, by the way, to explain why we can't do that. But it does cause a bit of a problem for us here, since we can't set that border radius. We'll have to see if we can do it another way, basically. So let's see if we can work around that. So let's just double check what variables we had to work with here. So background, what we could do potentially is just set the background to transparent and then have our own element with rounded corners in there. So let's try that by setting the background property. Again, let me just refresh, get rid of that. So we'll set background to transparent. Cool, so that's good. And then we have our div inside of that, this ion padding div. Let's give this another class actually of content container. Always terrible at coming out with these names. And then we'll give this the styling. So if we now say give that a background color of white. And also we will set the height to 100%. Okay, so now we're basically back at the same situation before. The layout looks the same as it did, except now we have our styling on our own div here rather than trying to target the ion content. So now hopefully we can just add a border radius to this. So 50 pixels. Let's look at our little reference here. Let's see what kind of corners, maybe a bit less than that. 30 pixels, maybe even more subtle, 25. I like 30 better. All right, 30. Okay, so now we have that. I'll just add that in here as well. Okay, so refresh that, make sure we've got all our styles included. Okay, so that is, we're sort of getting in the realm of that layout now. One quick thing I will do, I don't want to spend too much time working on the sort of little details of this. I'm just aiming for the big general idea of the layout, but we should, since we have that border radius there now, we should push that content down a little bit as well. So what I'm going to do is add a padding top of 30 pixels, just to maybe even 40 pixels, to give that a bit more space, space to breathe. So I'll add that in as well. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is make this toolbar transparent, which should be easy to do. The way you do that has changed a little bit over time, so I'm just going to check what kind of properties we have here to work with. There we go, translucent. If true, the header will be translucent. Only applies when the mode is iOS and the device supports backdrop filter. So there are other properties we can use to just make it transparent, but let me just see what that translucent looks like now. Yeah, so it's not the completely transparent toolbar, it's just a kind of see-through one. Let's stick to the this style, and we'll actually just make that completely see-through. I'm not sure if there was a CSS property in the toolbar for making that transparent. So yeah, we could probably just target the background and make that transparent. It's not sure if I'm missing anything, but yeah, let's do that. We'll get rid of translucent. Don't know if we need to make the header transparent too. So we'll say Ion toolbar background transparent. And yeah, there we go. And we also have that border as well, which we should get rid of, which I think is on the toolbar. Yeah, border width. So we should be able to just say on the toolbar, border width 0. And again, I'll link to another video as well on like CSS variables and stuff like that. That rule wasn't specific enough. Let's see if we can just add an important to get that in. Okay, there we go. And now this heart also looks a bit silly being blue, I think. So I'll say ion button color equals light. And I keep saying I'm not going to worry about the little details, and then I do anyway, but there we go. So at this point we have the basic idea of the layout, I think. Of course, we could actually put content into the card area as this example has, and that's obviously going to look a lot nicer when we have real content in there. I may do that at some point, I'm not sure. But again, yeah, the key thing we want to focus on here is just the big idea of the layout in general to see if we can get that working. So now we'll get into, I guess, maybe the harder part of this. And what I want to try to do now is create that animation of the card sliding up when you scroll down. So there are sort of several ways that we could go about doing this. One is to do a sort of simple CSS animation, which is what I think I probably will do. And the general idea would be to take this transform that we did and basically just, it's annoying, there's two there, turn it off and have it just animate up basically. And I should also remove the border radius at the bottom. Not going to do that now, but I'll keep that in mind. We'll probably change that later. And so we'll just use a CSS transition, and it will just transition from having this property to this property, and hopefully that should all be nice. I can't actually remember if transition works. Does that work when I just untick things in this debugger? I'm not sure. So transition 1 second. Hey, it does. That's cool. Yeah, so that's the general idea. So I think that's cool, and we'll probably just stick with that. But the other thing we could do is tie it to scroll events. So we could listen for scroll events on Ion content, and then move this area in response to that. So there's a potential for that to be cooler. We could create a kind of parallax effect, and you're going to kind of go up and down more smoothly with the scrolling. The downside of that is it's going to be harder to implement. So I probably won't tackle it in this video. And the other problem is when you're dealing with scroll events, a lot of events are fired off, and you need to be careful with performance. Since you might be updating a lot of things on the screen in response to scroll events, there's the potential there to run into some performance issues. So it's something that needs to be fine-tuned a little bit more, as opposed to just a simple transition animation. So now we just need to think of how we're going to trigger that animation. So the general idea is we'll listen for when the screen is scrolled down, and then we'll apply a class that contains the appropriate transform, and then that transition will just apply it. So what we'll probably do is listen for the scroll events. Before we do that, let's just fill out this content area with a bit more just content, just so that we have some stuff to scroll. Again, sorry I'm not making it look nice like this one, but maybe at another time. But I think we're focusing on the important stuff here, which is just seeing whether this is possible with Ionic, and usually things are possible. It's just a matter of how difficult they're going to be. So that's a problem with our little solution we came up with. Is this related to the offset? Let me just add even more stuff in here. Might need to change that offset value. Yeah. That is awkward. So one potential solution to this, which I may or may not use, I'd like to sort this issue out properly, but one solution here is to have it more in this style where you can't scroll. It's just like a card on the screen, and it just displays full screen, and that's it. Then we wouldn't need to worry about this scrolling issue. But let's see if we can sort this out. So what I was thinking is it might be related to this value here, this offset. So offset bottom. That doesn't seem to be in relation to that. Let me just put that value here. I'm not 100% sure what those offset values are actually doing. Let me just check to see if it explains in here. I'm not sure that it does. Offset top of the content. All right, let's just have a poke around in here and see. Okay, so it's coming out of the container. So if we set overflow to scroll, that seems to be working just fine. Okay, so maybe it's that simple. So let's just go with that for now and get back into what we were doing. So I set overflow to scroll. And yeah, for anyone not familiar, overflow is basically what we want to do when content's breaking outside of the box that it's bound inside of. We can either have it just display the overflowed content outside of the box, or we can create a scroll instead. or you could just hide it. All right, so we have our content in here now. So now what we want to do is listen to those scroll events. Another potential thing we could use is the intersection observer, which I've done before in a tutorial. I can't remember the details well enough right now to probably make use of that. So I'm going to use the scroll events on Ion content. So there's too many instances of scroll on here. Okay, so scroll events. So see, because of performance reasons, Ion scroll events are disabled by default. In order to enable them and start listening, set this property to true. So on Ion content, we are going to set scroll events to true. That should be hyphenated rather. And with that set to true, we should then be able to say Ion scroll, and then we can have that go to some method. So I'm just going to call this handle scroll. And it might also be worth pointing out now that, why did that pop up? Yes, it might be worth pointing out that this would probably be better as its own sort of custom component. I'm just building it directly into the homepage, but that's not really something I wanted to focus on in this video. So we'll tie that to handle scroll and pass through the event. And I don't know why that is suddenly complaining. I guess it's just Visual Studio being weird because the command line scene's fine. Anyway, let's just log out the event and see what we get. Okay, so if I scroll now, actually this could be another problem. If I'm scrolling the my content area and not the Ion content, let me just do another sanity check here. So what I'm going to do is just pop a whole bunch of content just into a normal Ion content here. And it's going to see if that gets the scroll events. Yeah, it does. So that is another issue we are running into. Yeah, so the problem basically is that since we set up this whole thing for the border radius, we're not actually scrolling the content area, the Ion content, we're scrolling our own div, and the Ion content is staying perfectly still. Whereas if we use this other content area, you can see we get these events popping out, which is a bit of a bummer for us, but just another challenge to solve, I guess. How fun. So if we can't get scroll events from Ion content, what I am thinking of is perhaps we could use the intersection observer. Let me just Google myself to see how we might actually go about using this. So I did a tutorial on animating list items with the intersection observer, and I think the general idea was that when the list items were coming into view, they would animate, and yeah. So let's just see if we can just remember how this works. So I could potentially have a specific element that we're observing perhaps for it to come onto screen, and when that happens we'll pop the card up. Alright, so let's just steal my own code and see if we can get this to work. So we are going to implement on init. It's annoying me that this is underlined. Maybe if I refresh, close it, open it. What is going on? All right, I'm gonna ignore it. I'm gonna try to ignore it. So we'll say implements on init. And we'll set up an ng on init. And we want to set up this observer. So I'll set up a member variable for that as well. So let's call that private observer, and that should be of type intersection observer, I guess. And then I'm just going to need to get a reference to one of the whatever element I want to trigger the animation when it comes on screen. So I'm just going to leave this commented out for now. So what I'm going to do is just set up view child here, and we're just going to grab I don't know, just one of these. Go one towards the end, and then we can move it if we want. So yeah, the general idea is we would have a specific element that when that scrolls onto the screen, we would trigger that content moving up. So we'll call this one the trigger element. Why not? And back in here, we'll use the view child to grab a reference to that. And we'll read the element ref. Sorry if like some of this stuff I'm not really explaining because I can't really cover all the concepts, but I'll try to link out to some stuff for things I'm not covering. And this is actually changed as well. Yeah, I think that's what I want. So we want to grab a reference to that element. I'll just call it trigger element here as well. And it's going to be a type element ref. So let me just check that I can actually get a reference to that. Okay, so we do have that native element P there, which is what we wanted. So now what we can say is this dot observer dot observe this dot trigger element dot native element, and we want to do something when it's intersecting. So for now, we'll just say console.log trigger animation. Just want to make sure we actually have things working. All right, so give that a refresh, scroll down, and it doesn't seem to be working. Why not? Did I save this? Let me just make that element a bit more obvious. I'm just gonna write the element so we can see which one should be triggering it. So that's another problem we have. Some of the content is off screen. So I think what we'd actually need to do is similar concept to what I think Ionic was doing with the offset. I think we would need to put some padding in at the bottom that is the same as whatever the offset is. So to do this a little bit more smartly, what I think we could do is just say padding bottom, and we'll set that to the value of whatever offset top is. I'm just going to spell that correctly. So hopefully that works. No. Let's have a look. Just set something ridiculous like 500 pixels. Okay, so that works. Was that, maybe I just had the wrong value? Was that not working? For some reason, oh, of course, offset top wouldn't be set to that, because I'm setting it here. Can I move that perhaps to the host? And hopefully then that will still move down. And that padding bottom still isn't working. Well, I don't want to spend too much time on that. I'm probably doing something silly here. But I don't want to spend too long debugging this, so I'll just put manual padding of 200 pixels there. And now it seems to be working. So if you watch over in the console here, as I scroll down, when I get to the element, and that's the one that has the intersection observer on it, it says trigger animation, so which is what we want. And so that is triggering it every time that comes into view. So what we'd probably want is then so we'll say with this, we'll add the class with the transform. So we'll say add transform, and then remove transform for this. So let's see if that works. So we scroll down and you see add transform popped up, remove transform, add transform, remove transform. So that seems to be working the way we would expect, the way we want it to, which is good. It does initially also start with the remove transform, but I don't think that's going to be an issue. So now what we want to do basically is use the Angular's renderer to add and remove a class. So what I'm going to do is, I'm just going to create a class called noTransform, and we'll set that to just what the initial translate 3D was, which is just 0, 0, 0. And that should have the effect of just removing the transform. And if we're going to have both on there, actually, best to set this to important, just in case one overrides the other. Now let's see if I can remember how to use renderer. It's been a little while, so I think it's still renderer 2. And then we would inject that into the constructor. So say private renderer 2. And then we're going to need a reference to our div. So our one with all the styling that has the, actually no, it's the Ion content that has the transform. So we're going to need to get a reference to the Ion content. So we're going to use viewChild again for that, and we're also going to import Ion content from the Ionic Angular library so we can more easily get a reference to that. So we'll say viewChild Ion content, want to read element ref static true. And again, let's just make sure we have that reference. So, oops, I got to give it a name. I'll just say content area, and it's a type Ion content. So I'm just going to log out that variable we just created just to make sure that we have a reference to it. And we do. We can see the native element there, so that's good. So to add the transform, well, it's actually kind of the opposite. Removing the class will add the transform. So let's start with the removing it, which is adding a class. We're adding the noTransform class to remove the transform. That's a little bit confusing, but let's go with it. So we'll say this.renderer as add class. How does this work with the element and then the class? Easy enough. So this.content area.native element, and we want to add the class noTransform. This actually should be an element ref type because we're getting the element ref from Ion content. So let's see. I'm thinking, do I have this backwards? I'm not sure. I'm just gonna do this. I'm not sure if I've got my logic backwards, but and then we want to remove class to trigger that. And we'll also need to, actually, we won't worry about this yet. Let's just see what's happening. Okay, so if I scroll down, so add transform was just triggered, which actually removes the class. Now it should be the other way around. No. Yeah. I'm so confused right now. Yeah, I think I got these console logs the other way around. That's what's confusing me. Just we add the class to send the content to the top. Now let's try this. We'll figure it out eventually. All right, so I scroll. I'm also just going to say adding class and removing class, just so I can see exactly what is happening. Tell me debug here. Okay, so it starts with removing the class, which is good. That's what we want. And then we scroll down and we get to adding class. So let's see if on Ion content now, if we have that style added, that class added rather. It's maybe just a case of me not having used the renderer for a while, but I'm not seeing that class being added. Let me, oh, it's right there. Literally right there. Okay, so the reason that it's not working is because I have messed this up somehow. Is that an O? Did I really write an O instead of a 0? I don't believe it. I did. My God. Okay, that's one of those errors that can trip you up for like hours and then you feel totally stupid when you find it. Let's try that again. Okay, so we'll scroll down, get to that section there. It just pops up, which we expect for now because we don't have the transition set yet. And then I'll scroll back past it and it pops down. Okay, so that's what we're expecting to happen. Now we just need to add that transition in. So that should happen on the Ion content. So we want to transition that translate. So we'll just do it over, say, 0.5 seconds. And we can play around with this animation a little bit to make it nicer. So scroll. Yeah, that's pretty cool, right? And yeah, I think this way is, like, this is, unless you did want to do like a parallax effect thing, I think this is actually really smooth. And I don't think the extra effort or performance impact would even be worth it for anything other than this simple CSS transition. So that is pretty cool. I was going to mess around with the animation a bit, but I think that works. Just as it is, just a linear 0.5 second animation. I do think the element is a bit far down. So what did I call that? Target element or something? Trigger element. So let's just move this guy up. We've got to make sure that it's off the screen to begin with, otherwise it's not going to work, but let's move him up a little bit. Yeah, I think that's pretty cool. So I think this video has gotten to be a little bit too long now. We haven't got to, removing that, the bottom border radius. It's not really a big deal. It's pretty simple to do. There probably are some other things we got to test out and try as well. We could make this a little bit nicer. We could test it to see if there's any funny behaviors that we run into, and we could probably, make some more code changes to deal with any edge cases we run across. But we have the general idea of this layout now, I think, and this animation wasn't necessarily a part of this, but I think it's cool anyway. So we have that section here where we could put a nice background image all the way at the top here. We can still have our buttons at the top, so we can click on toolbar stuff, and then when we scroll down, the card just pops up and gives us that extra screen real estate to play around with, display our content. So if you did like this video, please do let me know. Maybe, in this case, more so than others. This is obviously a more rambly type of video where I'm trying to work things out on screen, and I'm just not sure whether people like this, but yeah, perhaps people really do like this style of content where you can see me sort of messing up a bit and figuring things out. But yeah, I don't know if people perhaps want to see the more polished content where I plan things out in advance and could probably deliver this tutorial maybe in 10 minutes rather than, I don't know, 30 or 40 minutes. I don't know how long this is going to end up being. So yeah, please do let me know. Leave a like, a subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.